and not being, looking out for our best interests. So let's get into this message, and I'd like to, share some information with you. So again, according to Scripture, Deuteronomy 28 and 68, America is spiritual Egypt. This is a spiritual war that we are living. We were, America is spiritual Egypt, where the Hebrews are African Americans. And we have grown in number and in power. This is a spiritual war that we are living in. We were never included to be anything but slaves in America. But things have changed and we have gained our freedom. And we have an enemy. So that enemy, this is spiritual again. You know that this spiritual enemy works through flesh and blood people. So anyway, this enemy is out to steal, kill, and destroy our race, because there is still yet something big, something very powerful that is coming to restore us into a nation. We didn't just come into America, brought here the way that we were, to stay forever. This story is still not fulfilled. There's still another part of this story that we need to know about. That this is not our last stop here in America. The way that we were brought here, we were only brought here to fulfill a punishment. That punishment was the last 400 years. Now, there's something on the horizon that is still yet to come that everybody needs to know about. Okay, so it has been prophesied, what is to happen. And we need to read, the book of Exodus to find out why we're being treated like this. And just as this is spiritual Egypt, there was a captivity of 430 years in the land of Egypt. And what happened then is pretty much happening now. Our people were killed back then. Then it was, Pharaoh had told the people to the nursemaids, to cast all the babies into, to kill all the Hebrew male babies, so that our numbers would not continue to rise. But the midwives did not obey Pharaoh, and our babies were not killed at that time. And we were still allowed, God still allowed our numbers to increase and our power to rise even in that time. So, that is pretty much the same thing that is happening now. But why? Why is this? So Pharaoh had the same fears when he had ordered, the Hebrew babies to be killed at that time. He didn't want the Hebrews to rise up and overpower, their kingdom at the time. So there were just ways, to stop the Hebrews from, rising. So that is what's going on today. That's Pharaoh's mind in spiritual Egypt as of today. And we know who Pharaoh is. Pharaoh is our president, and with his mindset, he sides with white nationalists. He sides with those elements of our society that wishes to do us harm. He does not stand up for us for true justice for our people. He's playing both sides, against the middle, because he really, wants to see a white America again and not the America that is of today. So as I get more into this message, I will point out things to you, that will reinforce the things that I am saying. So, there's an element, that will not allow Black people to rise to our true potential and power because of these fears. See, every time that we had built a thriving community or that was self-supported, And these this particular element that I'm talking about had rose up against us and destroyed our communities. Take Black Wall Street and other communities like Rosewood. There were many others. Black Wall Street, Greenwood, what is it? In Greenwood, Oklahoma. It was destroyed from the sky. The first time back in the 20s, this happened. 1919, 1920, somewhere in that along that era, was the first time that a community was bombed from the sky. So we must know that there's just an element in this country that do not want to see Black people come to the position and power that they can, and really help the society of America. But as I said, this is Pharaoh and that spiritual system again. So we are a nation that is within a nation. Spiritual and biblically, we are to rise into a nation again, but this time in God's kingdom, because that's the next kingdom to come up, the millennial kingdom, and which is a kingdom of righteousness, which does include the church, y'all. It includes every people, every nation, and every tongue to be a part of this millennial kingdom. That will be reigned, that has been ordained by God, and that Jesus will, be over. So this is why this fight is still at our front door, because there is something yet to still happen with us as a people. So they can try to stop, the plans that God has put in place. But as I keep saying, our arms are too short to box with God. This is a spiritual matter manifesting in a natural realm. So we must understand that there is an underlying a spiritual force working, the plan of Satan in this time that we are living in. And he uses people. Just like God uses people, Satan uses people also. So, and I see a question that kind of threw me off and had me fumbling for a while. Rodney Wilson, you asked, are you being led by the Spirit or are you reading? Yes, I wrote down some things, to point out why, these things exist among us. And yes, I am reading, and yes, I was led by the Spirit to gather this information for us to know what is going on, where the root cause come from. All we're seeing is just the symptoms of the root. Now you need to know what the root is and why this is manifesting like it is. I keep telling us that this is spiritual. And there is Satan who is running this world, who is the God of this world. And it was chosen for him to have a time to rule, to take as many people as he can, that lines up with his perception of things. Just like, there are people who are of the church who do, follow the word of God, which was our law book, to keep us led in the right spirit, and how we treat people and how to live this life that God has given us upon this earth. So again, as I say, who can stop the plans of God or the move of God? So the underlying premise of carrying out Satan's order to steal our history and claim it as their own, so that we would not find out who we were and what we're all about as a people. This is his thing, and, trying to hide all this information or to take our history and claim as their own, so we would never find the truth, about who we are as a people, why we had to fall into this punishment, why it had to last 400 years, And, why our people have to be killed, while other people, this is not happening to them at the same degree it's happening to our people. Why do our people have to be killed, by the police who are there to serve and protect? They're not serving our communities and protecting our communities. So they kill us so that we cannot rise into a future nation. That is the whole, underlying reason for all of this. And it is to destroy us before the American captivity ends, where 1619 was the demarcation point. So this is why the plagues are here and civil unrest, because it threatens their status of superiority as the chosen people in the earth to be the head. So as I said, I pulled several articles to discuss racism and the inhumane treatment of black people in the United States since our ancestors were brought here 400 years ago and forced into slavery. And I hear some of us complain about black on black crime that's committed against our own people by our own people. So why are we crying out about police shootings and we're not dealing with black on black crime? Well, generally, when black on black crime is committed, somebody generally gets arrested or street justice takes them out. So that those crimes don't go unpunished. Yes, we do need to deal with black on black crime. But as we can see in Isaiah 3, we can find that God put black on black crime in our communities because he knew that we would come to a place where we would no longer be under this, type of captivity, where we can rise to prominent status, in this system and, still have some things and operate, as if there is no captivity over us. But remember, I told you what captivity is, that you are a nation trapped within another nation. We don't have our own land. We don't have our own wealth. And we don't have, our own sovereignty. So we are a nation within a nation. That's what it means by being in captivity. You can't just up and go somewhere else and start your own country, to start your own, people. To have sovereignty, because you need other things to make that happen. And only God can give us that at the appointed time, as he has promised in his word. So, when the police kill our people, they're under an unseen protection that allows them to get off with as little as a slap on the wrist. It goes far back to the Virginia Assembly Law of 1660. Just as another pastor, Pastor Stephen Wilkins, has informed us. He teaches about this, where these laws that they are using against us in this very present day, how it still keeps us, under subjection, to all of this inequality and these terroristic treatments of our people. So it is an act of casual killing of slaves passed by the General Assembly in 1969, where the masters who killed their slaves in the act of punishing them are held not to be responsible of murder. The Stand Your Ground law is based upon this law. It has been brought forward and updated in the form of this law. So when the police kill our people, they can hide under this law. That's why you see them, the police force that exists in America, they are parts of this white supremacist system that goes against our people. They hide under laws. And that is why it's so hard for them to get, correct sentences that, that should apply to them as well as anybody else. Like for the same crimes that are committed against our people, had they been white people, then they would get the appropriate sentence that meets the crime. But because we were brought to this country as and brought into slavery, the same laws do not apply. We don't have the same equal footing. So this is why, things are like they are, and it's a hard fight, to have laws change where, these things will be applied to them, that they will get the punishment to fit the crime. So George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Breonna Taylor, and Laquan McDonald are just a few names. They're just some of the names whose lives were taken by the racist police officers, whose main objective is to kill black boys and men. Okay, spiritual Egypt under, Pharaoh again. Now they do not show a regard for black pregnant mothers, women, or our children, like Tamir Rice, who was killed, by the police, of having a play gun, So these are trophy kills that these cops and others that kill black people, commit. Anytime, somebody kill us and then they're so comfortable in killing us, that officer did not think that all of this would have culminated into what it blew up to be. He thought that, he was protected under the law where, okay, if I do get in trouble, it's just going to be a slap on the wrist. I'm not going to get in serious trouble for killing, this black man because, for one, this is what we have been, this is what we have been I guess, pretty much taught to do, in unseen terms, or, not through printed words, so to speak, but this is their mind frame towards us, to eliminate us as a people so that we won't overtake these people. So they think, that we will grow into numbers, just like Pharaoh thought, that we will outgrow, the people here, and we will rise into power and take over and then treat them, the way that they have treated us. This is their mindset against us. Whether those things be true or not, this is still how they think, towards us. So they make sure that these things don't happen with, their unjust treatment of us. So these killings make a statement to white supremacists that it is okay to continue to kill blacks because you won't get in much trouble. They make a mockery out of justice because God, but now it's like God says enough is enough. America must face the sins of her past. That's why it is allowed, we've come into a timing where it is allowed to be shown, what's really the underlying, what's really the root cause of this system that we're living in. It was allowed for, that police officer, those police officers to be caught red-handed in killing, the black man, George Floyd, the way that he did, so that the world can see that we're not just crying out for the injustices of when we are killed, that, these police officers just get a slap on the wrist, or, the other white people that kill our people just get a slap on the wrist. No, it's to show them that our cries are for, because they are killing us. And the world needs to take heed. The world needs to know what is going on. So God made that happen. He made it possible for the world to see what is really going on. And like I said, you can equate the same thing that is happening to us to the mindset of Pharaoh back during the 430-year captivity of Egypt. So what needs to happen now is to hold all these racist police officers and the other people who kill our people to accountability. These police officers know the rotten apples in their ranks. And most of the time, it goes high up into leadership. That's why that scripture is written, that We don't fight against flesh and blood. We fight against spiritual wickedness in high places, rulers of authority, principalities. These are the spirits that we fight against that we see in people. So we must continue this movement until the laws are changed and accountability has been made as a part of the social justice system. No more chokeholds and this new tactic of lynchings that, with a knee on our necks to cut off oxygen and the carotid artery that supplies blood throughout the bodies. It is a killing in the matter of hanging, but without the tree. So George Floyd's demise has changed the world, the way he was killed, and the world saw it with their very own eyes. When he took his last breath with the racist police officer's knee on his neck, lynching him before our very eyes. Now, y'all know that if this was not caught on video, in the graphic nature that it was, that the world would not have joined us in this fight. But because God made it possible for that cover, to be taken off and it to be made exposed, that our cries are not unwarranted, that there is police brutality and shootings that have resulted in the deaths of Black people at the hands of these criminal police officers. We have gone through different periods of time since slavery that have never gave us an equal footing or a level playing field. The Reconstruction period came when Black people were made free. It was done to give Negroes, with what we were called at that time, and still are referred to, an identity and to uplift the lower classes of society. It soon failed because they did not ever intend for us to have equal rights. So in fact, in slavery, a slave could never be a citizen of the United States. So now that freedom has come, laws were developed to keep us in a state of being second-class citizens, counted as 3/5 of a human being when counted for political purposes, because we outnumbered them. So Reconstruction ended when Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the president at that time, made it where the federal government would accept responsibility for protecting our rights. The government had not done a good job of that, and they still are not doing it today. They were responsible for our protection, for protecting our rights. So look at how they still protect us today. With this police department, they just give them all rights to do what they want to do to us with little, provocation against them. With little, well, not provocation, but with little, penalties, issued against them to stand for, the criminal activity that they keep doing towards us. Their people can kill us, and they can get off with just a slap on the wrist. These police officers are members of the KKK, white nationalists, and other hate groups. Not all, but the police officers that are ruling in these mindsets over our people. Our ancestors suffered at the hands of mobs that burned crosses in the front yards and being hung on trees. This was to inflict fear, to make them stay in their place, a place designated as underneath the feet of white people. Because our ancestors were freed, we still had to eat the bread of diversity as we eat it today. Nothing has changed except them uplifting these slave codes and laws to fit today's reality and to give them protection to give them protections from taking Black lives. So as another foot was placed on our necks, a racial system of Jim Crow was put in place to disenfranchise our people and the gains that were made during the Reconstruction period. After Jim Crow, a racist system that kept us segregated and separated, came civil rights, which involved Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X fight. It was an updated version of Reconstruction to uplift the lower classes of society. So migrations took place because our people wanted to leave the racist South for jobs and a more secure life than the racist South offered. There are a lot of race riots that happened after our ancestors became free, even up to the time period of our present day, which involved Rodney King, who was caught up in one of these riots in Los Angeles, California in the 1990s. I think it was around 1992. And the prison system, this is a new form of slavery and free labor. Our people get excessively long prison sentences compared to that of their white counterparts with the same crimes. So with police brutality, they should be held accountable for their crimes they commit against black people. So in speaking against the Great Migration, in highlighting the Great Migration, what happened during that period, interactions between African Americans and urban police departments were initially shaped by the Great Migration of 1916 to 1970 of African Americans from rural South into urban areas of the North and West, especially following World War II. Most white communities, including white police departments, were unaccustomed to the presence of African Americans and reacted to their increasing numbers with fear and hostility, attitudes that were exacerbated by the deeply ingrained racist stereotypes, reflecting the beliefs of many whites. Northern police departments acted upon the presumption that African Americans, and especially African American men, possessed an inherent tendency toward criminal behavior, one that requires constant surveillance of African Americans and restrictions on their movement, which means segregation, in the interest of white safety. According by the mid-1950s, many urban police departments had implicitly received their missions as essentially that of policing African Americans, protecting whites against blacks. The forms of police brutality to which this situation gave rise were variable and generally not limited to physical assault, which is beatings and excessive use of force. They also included unlawful arrests, verbal abuse, racial slurs, and threats, sexual assaults against African American women, and police homicides, murders of civilians by police. Police were also sometimes complicit in drug dealing, prostitution, burglaries, protection schemes, and gun smuggling within African American neighborhoods. Although police brutality against African Americans had become a serious problem in many urban areas by the mid-20th century, most whites remained unaware of it until the mid-1960s, in large part because most large city newspapers, whose readership were primarily white, did not consider it newsworthy. In contrast, incidents of police brutality were regularly covered in the black press from the early 20th century, frequently in front page articles. Likewise, local and national civil rights organizations collected thousands of affidavits and letters from African Americans documenting their direct experience with police brutality. Now, police brutality after World War II. For a variety of reasons, incidents of police brutality against African Americans became more frequent and intense throughout the country in the decades following World War II. First, the victory of the forces of democracy in the war overseas created among African Americans expectation of greater freedom and democracy at home, especially as many of them had served in combat in the U.S. Armed Forces, albeit racially segregated units. As Black Americans began to assert their former rights and liberties, demanding that they be restricted by local governments, judiciaries, and law enforcement agencies, their demands had the effect of reinforcing the tendency of white police officers to view themselves as protectors of white communities. Second, the migration of rural whites to nearby cities in search of better economic opportunities encouraged police to view their own violence against African Americans as more acceptable means of control than mob hysteria, let me read that over. African Americans as a more acceptable means of control than mob hysteria that white rural whites had been accustomed to, and the urban spaces simply did not allow. In effect, police brutality replaced lynchings as a mean of oppressing blacks. During this period, white supremacists and terrorist organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan and White Citizens Council operated openly in southern cities, where police brutalities against African Americans was abetted by government and political leaders, district attorneys, judges, and among others. Now remember, I told you, after the Reconstruction period, the federal government was the one to protect our rights. Now we read here, the federal government, the political leaders, district attorneys, and judges are the ones who do this, who allow this police brutality against us. So third, in other cities, especially in the North, the flight of whites to the suburbs and the natural growth of African American populations made African Americans more visible and allowed them to be more mobile within formerly white areas. Such demographic changes made African Americans as a group appear more threatening to white police officers and allowed the latter to be more easily justified. Extra legal tactics as a mean of controlling African American mobility and limiting their use of public spaces. Fourth, beginning in 1970s, African Americans who had joined local police forces in large numbers as a result of aggressive recruitment and affirmative action programs themselves committed serious act of brutality against African American civilians, in part because they wished to be seen as good cops, and to be otherwise accepted within their own department. So again, that crab in a barrel mentality and that house nigga, field nigga mentality rather. How, the house nigga had to turn against the field nigga. So they did this in order to be seen as good cops and to be accepted among their peers in the police, on the police force. That's why you have, why you have your number of black police who do the same type of black on black crimes against black people, police brutality among our own people. Finally, the escalation of urban crimes rates in the 1970s and 80s, including a predominantly African American and other minority neighborhoods, strengthened their perception among white police officers and whites generally of African Americans as inherently criminal. A trend also reflected a newly racially charged political and policy discourse, referred to by critics as criminalization of black, poor, working class. Okay? So, police brutality and race riots. From the 1960s, police brutality was a catalyst for many of the race riots. Riots caused by racial dissensions or hatred that took place in urban America, including the Watts riots of 1965 and the Detroit riots of 1967. In 1980, the Liberty City section of Miami erupted over the police killing of an unarmed African American man. During a period of 3 days, 18 people were killed and some thousand arrested, and more than $100 million in property damage was committed. 12 years later, the beating of Rodney King by Los Angeles police officers and their subsequent acquittal on charges of assault with deadly weapon and excessive use of force triggered the Los Angeles riots of 1992, still considered the worst race riot in American history. During a period of 6 days, more than 50 people were killed and more than 2,300 were injured, and property damage was estimated at about $1 billion. In 2014, the fatal shooting of an unarmed African American teenager, Michael Brown, by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, and a grand jury subsequent decision was not to indict the officer on criminal charges, provoked rioting in that city. Later, race riots, along with peaceful demonstrations, followed the death in police custody of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland in 2015, and George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, 2020, both of whom were African American. So the Los Angeles riot of 1992, a National Guard standing watch in Los Angeles in late April 1992 during rioting that raged in reaction to the acquittal of white Los Angeles policemen who have been captured on videotape a year earlier beating an African American, Rodney King, while King resisted arrest. What does Ecclesiastes say? There's nothing new under the sun. What happened before will happen again. This is happening all over again. This police brutality, us fighting for our rights, fighting for equal justice system. So let us be aware that the state of Georgia do not have a hate crime law. So Ahmaud Arbery may not get the justice that he deserves because of this. So our fight continues, and we will see what it morphs into. So the anti-brutality campaigns. Most victims of police brutality, including not only African Americans, but also whites and other ethnic groups, have come to the ranks of poor and low-income working classes. They have consequently lacked significant political influence or the financial resources that are sometimes necessary to effectively publicize complaints of police brutality. Nevertheless, anti-brutality campaigns have been mounted in nearly every major city with a sizable black population. And sometimes large demonstrations, members of victimized communities have demanded, in addition to an end to police brutality and accountability for guilty officers. Major reforms, including the hiring of African American police officers and placement of more African American officers in supervisory positions. Racially integrated patrols or black only patrols in African American neighborhoods. Civilian review boards and federal investigations by the Justice Department and egregious cases of police brutality. Their tactics have included sit-ins, boycotts, picketing, and close monitoring of police activity, including from the late 20th century by means of video taken with handheld cameras and mobile telephones. In 2014, the death of Michael Brown and Eric Garner, the latter an African American resident of Staten Island who had been held in a prolonged illegal chokehold by white police officers, led anti brutality activists to start a powerful social movement, Black Lives Matter. The movement subsequently played a prominent role in nationwide protests following other extreme acts of police brutality against African Americans. In retaliation attacks in 2016, 5 white members of Dallas, Texas Police Department and 3 police officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana were shot and killed. So let's go back up here to this other paragraph that I just read. The egregious cases of police brutality are being investigated by the Justice Department. We have civilian review boards. We have federal investigations. We've done sit-ins. We've done boycotts. We've done picketing. Close surveillance of monitoring police action. Now, other nations of people who are truly interested in us getting, an equal footing in a justice system have to police the police. Other people have to get involved because this system, this racist, cruel system that is from Satan, it's not just going to end like this, So there are things that have been put in place already, for us to get to a place of equality in our justice system. But there's still more things that are needed. The mindset of our Black police officers who think that they have to do these things, to prove to their white, peers, police peers that, they are the good cops. That mindset needs to be changed among our own people. That resonates with that black on black crime, okay? Done by our own people against our own people. Same thing with the police department. We need to address all of these issues, not just with the white police officers with these racist mindsets, but the black ones, with this type of mindset against their own. So we have a lot to combat, with the things that are being put in place to target and attack these problems, to change these situations. So with this president that we have, he says that he's the least racist person. Okay? So if he says he's the least racist person, what does that really mean? That he does operate in racism. So, and we can see that by his actions, not because I'm saying this out of my mouth, but let's look at the character of our president. Let's look at the things that he stands for. Just like how he handled, doing his little photo op, when there was a peaceful protest, in Washington, for the killing of George Floyd. The way in which he was killed and the way these police officers are getting away with these things. This is how he chooses to rule America. How he chooses to stand, not for all of us, but for part of us. For the ones where he says, make America great again, which actually means make America white again. So we do have a fight on our hands. And it starts with the very, office of the president. So in reading the rest of this article, racism is telling 4 congresswomen of color to go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came from, which is by this man named Jonathan Capehart. He does a weekly podcast. And this is his, addition to what he has to say about the president and his mindset towards racism. He says that all 4 are American citizens. 3 of them were born here and one migrated here when she was 12. Racism is standing back for 13 seconds as Donald Trump supporters chant, "Send her back," about the latter congresswoman at a campaign rally. Racism is always applying words like infested or invasion to communities of color and not to white communities. Racism is continuing a racist rant against an American city. It's African American congressman and another black civil rights leader because you believe that it will appeal, because the president believes that it will appeal to his base. Racism is questioning the citizenship of the first black president of the United States. And if people are still not clear that racism is saying that there are very fine people among the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and Ku Klux Klan members who marched on Charlottesville on August 12th of 2017, the last day of the life of Heather Heyer, who was killed when a white supremacist rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters Heyer was a part of. So no matter how our president, the president of the United States, is a racist, we can see, we can hear, and we can know what racism is and what the highest office in the land, the man who holds the highest office in the land, where his heart and his mind is. So that contribution was by Jonathan Capehart with his weekly podcast. A civil war. Why are white supremacists protesting the death of black people? The conversation. Matthew Valasic, associate professor of sociology, Louisiana State University, and Shannon Reed, associate professor, University of North Carolina, both contribute this as the conversation, which was printed June 5th of 2020. They say a member of the far-right Boogaloo Boys group walked next to protesters in Charlotte, North Carolina on May 29th, 2020. As protests about police violence among black people continue to become more widespread across the U.S., certain individuals and groups have begun to stand out, including anarchists, agitators, and members of a variety of far-right groups. With the country's long history of racist killings, it may be confusing to think that racists and white supremacists are among those objecting to the killing of people of color. But people affiliated with far-right groups aren't trying to be a part of the overall protest movement. Having researched these groups, they think it is likely that they are attempting to hijack the event for their own purposes. As researchers of street gangs and far-right groups, they see that in this case, they want to stoke a civil war between the races. One they think they can win by antagonizing police, destroying property, or intimidating the public by adopting military gear, including weapons. These groups are attempting to instigate violence between the police, protesters, and the public. Rousing law enforcement to violently retaliate against black people en masse is a first step. So, instigating civil war. The far right is not unified by strict ideology. It is a broad movement with various factions vying for greater amounts of attention and influence. In spite of this tension, our research, there's research shows that many share in the conspiracy belief that Western governments are corrupt and controlled by the New World Order, a cabal of wealthy Jewish elites. To them, wealthy Jewish investors And democracy advocate George Soros is the puppet master of the world economy. William Luther Pierce's 1978 novel, The Turner Diaries, which has come to be known as the Bible of the racist right, lays out a plan to instigate a race war and bring about the federal government's collapse. The book has inspired violence from the far right, most notably the 1995 bombing at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Accelerationism, the idea that includes chaos provoking law enforcement and promoting political tension, will hasten the collapse of Western government, has taken root among far-right groups. One such group, the Boogaloo Boys, identified by their penchant for wearing Hawaiian shirts, have been observed at protests in Minneapolis, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and Oregon. As with any far-right movement, Boogaloo Boys groups are rather unstructured and have varied beliefs, lacking in hierarchical organization. In Las Vegas, 3 Boogaloo Boys were arrested with firearms and a plan to incite violence during George Floyd protests. Some media posts and online chat groups have also shown them attempting to infiltrate other protests across the country. Joining the crowds provides these groups an opportunity to discredit protesters by inciting looting, rioting, violence, and vandalism, which they hope will spark like-minded white Americans to resist the civil disobedience of protesters. Already, there are roving bands of armed white counter-protesters at protests across America. Other far-right extremists are talking on social media about the protests requiring a lot of police attention and see an opportunity to engage in targeted terror attacks. Their overall intention is the same: fanning flames to burn down the federal government, making room for them to establish white-only country. So this article republished from the Conversation, a nonprofit news site dedicating to sharing ideas and from academic experts. So I gathered these articles to show you what is going on behind the scenes, what is fueling, this terroristic treatment against Black people. It all results from the way that we were brought into this country. And even though we are far removed from slavery and, what transpired during Jim Crow, we still have to, face a group of people, a mindset that still remains in this country that support, our enslavement and our captivity. So I wanted to let you all know that to show you actually the root cause and all of these tentacles that are streaming from, this root cause. So you will know that because, we must continue this fight. This is what we're facing so that we will know, our challenges, because we're thinking, okay, this is the 20th century. We're in 2020. We no longer have to deal, with the racist oppression. We no longer have to deal, with those that have put us in, that brought us into our ancestors into enslavement. No, we still have to deal with those racist mindsets. So this is to give you an idea and, the opportunity to, go back to the drawing board and look at what we've already come up with, and to know what we still need to put into place in order to combat, this terroristic treatment against us. So, from what God has raised me, given me to give to the people, He's given me through Bible understanding, biblical understanding, that there will be a second Exodus. So this is my prediction, that just as it was with the Egyptians who grew tired of the children of Israel back during the 430-year captivity, Pharaoh and the people paid the Hebrews to leave their country because of the plagues and the troubles that were brought on them because of the enslavement of the people, the children of Israel, the children of Israel at that time. So it is just like that Bible story of the first Exodus, that it will, repeat itself, that we have another Exodus to go through, and that these people are going to pay us through reparations and through, the things that they have of ours, that scripture will fulfill itself, and that they will give back, those things that belong to us, and that we will leave, all the countries, all the places that we were scattered, because of our punishment of Deuteronomy 28, 15 through 68, whether you agree with it or not. Prophecy is fulfilling itself. So you have to remember the scripture of Matthew 11 and 12 says, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. So that is where we're standing right now, people. Okay? So we have come to another end of, another broadcast of Eyes Can See. Tomorrow is the Sabbath. Let us remember that it is a day of rest that God dedicated, from his creation, that we all should, participate in, especially being his children, during this captivity. So Revelations 18 and 4 says to come out of her. So eventually at the appointed time, we will come out of her according to scripture. So please check out discover.empresssharon.com to take that free day e-course to discover your stolen identity and your lost history. So until next time, enjoy your weekend and many blessings for the upcoming week. Thank you for tuning in, and please share this message with everyone. Have a great day. Bye for now.